Vanguard has decided to pull out of the ESG cooperation. So ESG, if people don't already know, it's environmental, social governance. And this is basically a way to control labor and resources really from companies and then consumers, so from the top down, but in a nice little package. So all that rules the world, it's not money, it's not finances, it's ideology. So the ideology of people at the top, the people who have the most power, the people who can cooperate with other people who have tied interests together, these are the people who are able to enact a lot of change onto the world. There can be good change, there can be bad change. There can be good change like building skyscrapers, building new jobs, having cars and different types of engineering feats, building bridges. And the bad types of ideologies that are implemented, well, these often result in wars or in fascistic regimes, communistic regimes. So when we evaluate these ideologies, we see how they affect everyone from the top down. Now, specifically with ESG, this is a nice little package way of saying, here's the ideology. Here are a bunch of corporations who already align with each other idealistically, and then they look at other corporations below them. So these may still be companies that are worth billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars by market share cap. And they will say, we're going to give you guys a rating, and we're going to rate you, and based off that rating, that will determine how much leeway you have in certain regards. So that could be subsidization, because there are links to the government where government will subsidize an industry or subsidize companies within an industry to promote, to incentivize them or promote a certain industry for, let's say, economic gain to stimulate the economy in some fashion. And so they will have access to that, or loans. It can get very political because you'll have corporations and people who, let's say they own a certain land and you want access to that land. If you're not part of the club, you're not going to get access to that land. Again, very decent example, I suppose, simplistic example. And then you have the companies below them who are just starting out. So they're not worth billions of dollars. Maybe they're not even worth millions of dollars, but let's say they're worth millions. Okay, these are small cap companies. I'm using stock market metrics for people to understand. There's small cap, mid cap, large cap. So you have smaller companies who come in and they say, well, we're trying to compete with you guys. We want to get into this market share. We want to compete in this industry, but we have to submit to a certain ideology, which is ESG, and we have to get higher credit scores. This is all like credit scores, but for the environment, for climate change. And if we don't get a certain credit score, we are punished by corporations and governments who will prevent us from competing in this industry. And just to show how backwards this type of credit score is right now, it's a type of social credit score, but for corporations. This is about climate, yet ExxonMobil has a higher ESG rating than Tesla. Now, Tesla is supposed to be renewable energy. That's what they're fighting for. And ExxonMobil is the opposite, non-renewable energy, using fossil fuels, of course. But ExxonMobil gets with the game plan in different regards. One regard is they will buy carbon credits, and then they will create types of pollution, but they will offset the pollution with carbon credits. So it's a way of just buying their way out in a sense, but they're submitting to the ideology of ESG. Whereas Tesla, because it's run by Elon Musk, he is not necessarily submitting to that, let's say, localized agenda, localized ideology within the people at the top. So that is very backwards. It's not really about the surface level goal that they tell the people. It's always about control over people, resources, labor. What do people inherently want? Power, resources, money, women, control over people's labor. People have been wanting this since the dawn of time, since we were hominoids. So it's not crazy to understand that this is still going on, even though like we're the same human as we were 200,000 years ago. The only difference is we have better technology, advanced societies. So it may seem different, like we're much different than 200,000 years ago, and in many regards we are, but we are still the same type of creature who values the same materialistic or idealistic goals, but for our own biased purposes. Now, this affects consumers at a lower level, because if you have all these corporations who come together and let's say they form monopolies or oligopolies because there are certain companies that are restricted from entering the market, you're going to end up with oligopolies who are part of this top-down ideology, and they will produce the products and services for the consumers. So when you're a consumer, all you're left with is, I can only purchase product A, B, or C, and A, B, and C, it could be better. It could be, let me give an example. On the new iPhone, there's a setting on the iPhone saying, and you can toggle it on or off right now. If you toggle it on, and by default it's on, your iPhone will only charge when the iPhone determines through software that the energy source it's collecting electricity from is environmentally friendly, which means if it's not environmentally friendly, your iPhone won't charge. And so you'll have different implementations like this right now. We're seeing this right now in 2023, but this can scale up to an extent of you can only get these products or only these services because these are climate friendly products or services. Everything else is illegal or on the black market. And so if you participate in it, you'll be jailed or fined. And that can stifle innovation, that can stifle growth, that can stifle what is actually best for the consumer. And so if you have potential access to a product, let's say it would give you insane internet speeds. Okay, let's say it would download 100 megabytes per second versus, oh no, you need to get this internet speed, and we're actually going to make it only, you can only use this internet service provider because this is the legalized service provider because it's climate friendly, it has a high ESG score, and that is going to give you 10 megabits per second. Well, you're going to have a fraction of what your internet speed could be, just because it's part of the ESG ideology, just because it's part of the ESG programming. And this will slowly roll out to become a label on certain companies, and they'll say they're ESG friendly and things of that nature, similar to how companies are saying we're BPA free. BPA is a type of chemical from plastics that can have negative effects, especially on men's fertility. So companies will say BPA free, but they're still using plastics. They're just using different types of chemicals or molecular structure of different types of plastics. And so it still can affect you negatively, but the marketing aspect is BPA, right? So these now become little monikers, little labels that can be put on products or services to identify, hey, this is climate friendly, this is better for the environment, whatever it is. It may not necessarily be better for you. The same thing, another example is plant-based proteins. So now we have these burgers, these patties. It's not made out of beef, it's not from cows, from steers. It's all lab processed, lab grown, but there are chemicals that are being put in this fake meat, and those chemicals are not necessarily good for you as a human being. It's unnatural, and there's a lot of toxins in there. But if you present it as this is better for the environment, and potentially this is better for you, the marketing aspect of it, the majority of people will fall for it. And so ultimately, when you have a certain ideology that is presented and corporations go along with it, either they're coerced or you create oligopolies and you create a barrier so smaller companies cannot compete with the top companies. Ultimately, you'll have consumers that have limited choice. So now their individual rights are being limited because consumer rights, consumer choice is a derivative of individual rights. Now your consumer rights, your consumer choices are restricted with only a few options, and these options may not be the best for you, but any other option is either way too expensive and only the elite can afford it because it's not ESG friendly or it has a low ESG score, and so therefore if you want to purchase it, it's going to be substantially higher, and it could be artificially higher price-wise, but it could also be naturally higher just because there's less production for lower ESG products and services. Therefore, if you want that ESG product or service, it's going to cost a lot more because there are less people that are demanding it. So you can artificially manipulate one system and it could manipulate another system naturally, but it's still indirectly being artificially manipulated. So ultimately here we're seeing our consumer rights being degraded. This is all happening in real time. Now we are seeing, like I said, some big companies like Vanguard pull out because they're realizing, hey, I need to do my fiduciary duty of investing in companies that are actually going to make my clients money, not just they're climate friendly and I'm going to get a 5% less return a year just because we were trying to meet these ESG requirements. So that is some positive notes. But when you have a lot of companies and there are just people working at these companies, when they have certain interests that align with other people's interests and they're all willing to work together because they financially and ideologically benefit, well, there's no reason for them not to collude with each other. And thus, us at the bottom, us who have no vote in this matter, we are now consequentially receiving the end deal, the bad end of the deal, which limits our consumer choice. What are we going to have access to? What resources are going to be limited from us? What are we going to be restricted to? Where are we going to be shepherded to in terms of what we can consume, what we can not just consume like food or beverage wise, but what we can watch, what cars we can buy. This all changes our life dramatically. We just don't yet see the intentional or unintentional consequences of what this will look like 20, 30 years down the road.